But Meera Stratton stepped off the transport bus at Laughlin Air Force Base just after 0620. She moved without hesitation, one duffel over her shoulder, eyes forward, boots clicking softly against the concrete. Around her, clusters of new cadets stood laughing, joking, phones out snapping blurry selfies against the morning sun. No one noticed her at first. She wore the same issued uniform, same stitched name tape, same crew-cut braid that fell just below regulation. But something about the way she walked, the economy of movement, the stillness between steps, caught the eye of one senior instructor near the sign-in table. He glanced at his clipboard, paused, then said nothing. Stratton handed over her orders, nodded once at the acknowledgement, and moved to the side without waiting for further instruction. She didn't ask where the dorms were. She didn't need to. By 07:05, the rumors had already started. One cadet from Oregon leaned toward another during formation lineup and whispered, "Diversity slot." Right, I heard she skipped selection. By noon, the phrase had spread. A few upperclassmen in the chow hall snickered, calling her the quota pilot. No one asked her story. No one cared to. The air at Laughlin carried a dry heat, even in early spring. Inside the training wings, humidity from bodies and machines clung to every surface. Stratton spent most of her first afternoon seated quietly outside the T6, simulator bay, hands folded, studying a laminated procedures manual that every other cadet had skimmed and forgotten. When an instructor called names for check rides, she answered without delay. Her voice was steady, unremarkable. In the sim, she performed clean pre-checks, followed every checklist item in order, made her turns on time. Not flawless, but tight, controlled. She logged her first simulated takeoff at 13:42, made a textbook pattern circuit, and landed without comment. The evaluator noted it with a simple mark. No praise, no critique. In the dorms, she was assigned a single bunk near the emergency exit, a narrow locker, one small window, and the low hum of HVAC that never quite shut off. Most nights, other cadets swapped stories down the hall. Comparing instructors or laughing over flight sim glitches, Meera said nothing. She cleaned her boots. She studied systems manuals. She reviewed airspace regulations until the base lights dimmed. Her bunkmate, a sharp-tongued aviation major from Georgia, tried to prod her once during lights out. "You fly back home." Stratton crop dusters or just radio-controlled toys. Meera didn't look up. She just closed the manual in her lap, clicked off the lamp, and lay down without a word. Instructors noticed, though few said anything. Her checklist adherence was impeccable. Her uniform pressed every morning by 05:15. She never missed morning PT, never fumbled during weapon safety drills, never fell out of step on the march. But there was no spark, no edge, at least none visible. The T6 Texan 2 was unforgiving in the sim. More than once, a cadet flared too late or blew a call out. Not Stratton. Her timing was always right. Her hands moved across the throttle and trim wheel with an ease that suggested hours of repetition, the kind that didn't come from a classroom. Still, the whispers continued. A few joked that she must be somebody's niece. Others insisted she was fast-tracked by some Pentagon program to fill a gender quota. No one asked her. They didn't need to. The silence around her became part of her identity. On the training apron, Stratton stood alone. During aircraft walkarounds, she double-checked pitot covers, torque specs, and control surface hinges without being told. Once, a tech sergeant paused while reviewing her maintenance log. The T6 she inspected had a minor flap irregularity. She noted it before the sensor flagged it. He raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. By the end of week 1, she had flown 4 simulator rotations, logged 10 hours in ground prep, and passed all written assessments. Her average sat at 96.2%. The class average hovered closer to 81. No one celebrated her numbers. Most didn't know them. They only saw a quiet woman who never joined the banter, never stayed for coffee after debrief, and always stood slightly apart during briefings. In the classroom, she took notes by hand. No laptop, no questions. When asked directly by instructors, she answered concisely, never over-explaining. Some mistook it for aloofness, others for insecurity. The truth sat quietly beneath both discipline honed in places where wrong. Words cost more than points. On Sunday evening, a group of cadets passed her in the dorm corridor. Headed to the rec center, one muttered, "Bet she washes out by the solo check." Another laughed. "They always do." Stratton didn't turn. She pushed open the stairwell door and disappeared down toward the maintenance wing. Instructors began comparing notes by week 2. One noted her situational awareness in the cockpit. Another flagged her radio brevity. A third commented that she landed a crosswind sim with fewer corrections than most senior cadets, but nothing was said aloud. No medals, no citations, just quiet circles on an internal report. The barracks door creaked open each morning at 04:47. She was already up. By the time her bunkmate's alarm rang at 050, Meera had completed a full review of the next day's flight briefing. She kept her boots polished, her gloves folded flat inside her locker, and her flight checklist clipped to a board with a red tab color-coded by phase. On the T6 flight line, no one stood near her during pre-flight checks. She walked the perimeter alone, gloves in place, checklist in hand, eyes on every detail. Her silence made others uneasy. Her correctness made them suspicious. She didn't laugh during crew briefs. She didn't flinch when cadets joked about ditching in the Gulf. She didn't even blink when a senior cadet tapped her shoulder one afternoon and said, "Hey, ever flown anything real?" She looked at him once, then returned to adjusting her harness straps. At 08:23 the next morning, she was in the sim again, her hands on the controls before the screen even lit up. When the left engine failed on climb out, she adjusted throttle, retrimmed, and made the call out with perfect cadence. The evaluator didn't stop the sim, just watched, noted something on the pad. Outside, the Texas wind scraped dust along the edges of the concrete apron. A flight of T6s taxied toward the runway, engines humming in sync. The sky stretched wide and empty above the flight line. Meera watched from the shaded bleachers, visor pulled low, checklist in her lap. Her name wasn't on the manifest for that sortie. She knew that, but her fingers traced each line of the procedures as if her name was the only one that mattered. By 17:00, the classroom lights flickered on again. She was still seated, still reading. No one else noticed. They had forgotten she was there, or maybe they never really saw her to begin with. By week 2, the simulator lab at Laughlin Air Force Base had settled into its usual rhythm. Cadets rotated in and out of T6 Texan 2 modules, barking out call-outs, fumbling with trim controls, misreading panel warnings. The instructors logged scores with weary detachment. Most were just trying not to stall. A few managed decent climbs. No one stood out. Then Meera Stratton took the left seat. It was 13:40 when her name appeared on the board. No one said much. A few cadets glanced up, then back down. She walked in, calm as ever. Gloves already on, checklist clipped to the yoke. The instructor at the console, a former instructor pilot from Randolph, watched her closely but didn't interrupt. The sim started cold and dark. Stratton worked through the startup sequence methodically. Battery on. Avionics switched to on. Beacon light. Mixture rich. Ignition. Her right hand moved across the controls without hesitation, her eyes never pausing more than a second on any gauge. By 13:46, the virtual engine purred steady. RPM stabilized, oil temp rising. In the observer bay, another instructor leaned in. "She's fast," he said quietly. The one at the console didn't answer. He just marked the timer and kept watching. Meera rolled out of the virtual hangar onto taxiway Alpha, holding short at the simulated runway. Her radio call was clipped and clean. Laughlin ground, Tiger 04 holding short runway 13L, ready for departure. The simulated ATC cleared her for takeoff. She advanced the throttle smoothly. No overcorrection, no torque yaw, just a clean roll. Nose wheel up at 85 knots, gear in by 150 feet. At 2,000 feet, the instructor injected a fault. Right engine failure, partial oil pressure drop. The fault indicator lit up in red. Stratton didn't pause. She tapped the caution light with one gloved finger, identified the failure, and started the corrective checklist out loud. Throttle idle, mixture cutoff, fuel selector off. She maintained altitude with minimal trim changes, banked into a wide right turn for a safe landing return. The instructor narrowed his eyes. Her scan wasn't rushed. It was rehearsed, not classroom rehearsed, something else. By the time she put the sim back down on runway 13L, 19 minutes had passed. No hard landings, no overflare. She exited the cockpit, unclipped her gloves, and walked to the corner of the room where the other cadets were seated. No one looked at her. One cadet from Arizona leaned over and muttered to the one next to him. Anyone can memorize checklists, but the instructor wasn't convinced. Later that day, Colonel Halverson stopped by the sim lab. He didn't say why. He stood behind the console while the next group ran a basic nav drill. Stratton was there, standing near the rear bulkhead, arms folded, not speaking. The colonel watched the screen as another cadet botched a heading correction, then glanced sideways at her. After the group logged out, he caught her as she passed. "Where'd you say you trained again?" he asked. She didn't blink. "Civil aviation program." Her tone was neutral. The colonel nodded slowly, eyes narrowing, then stepped aside. She didn't look back. On paper, Meera blended in. No one flagged her files. Her fitness scores sat comfortably above average. Her academics were perfect. She never missed a flight brief or failed a systems quiz. She wasn't the loudest or the weakest. She was invisible to everyone except the ones who had seen what combat flying really looked like. A week later, during an early morning weather sim, she flew through low-visibility IFR conditions without needing a prompt. She adjusted headings before the instructor issued reroutes. She called altitude deviations within 50 feet of the transition altitudes. At ZO6-14, she identified a potential stall 2 turns before it developed and compensated. Automatically. The instructor didn't stop the drill. He let her finish. The score posted on the classroom screen later that day, 100.0. No penalties. Carter Ree, the cadet who had joked about her boots on day 1, whistled low. Guess she actually flies, another cadet said, or she's just good at sims. Ree chuckled. Sim ain't combat. The instructor overheard and said nothing. One evening after chow, a junior instructor walked past the dorm hallway and spotted Meera alone in the reading room. She had one hand polishing her boots. The other rested near a folded aircraft schematics map. He stepped inside. You flew before, didn't you? He asked. She didn't look up. Everyone here's flown, she said. Not like that, he replied. Her silence held. At the next morning briefing, she was assigned to the front of the review group, not middle, not rear. The front, Ree raised a brow. She didn't flinch. Another sim came later that day. Engine failure after takeoff, bird strike simulation, oil pressure drop, and hydraulic system failure combined. It was a worst-case scenario. The sim tech at the console said, You sure you want to run this one? Instructor nodded. Let's see what she does. Stratton climbed in, ran pre-flight, initiated takeoff. At 450 feet AGL, the faults triggered. She lost right yaw control and partial elevator responsiveness. She lowered the nose slightly, retrimmed, and banked toward a nearby virtual runway. She made no verbal reaction to the failures, just action, rechecked gauges, cut unnecessary power loads, adjusted her descent to match a shallow glide slope. The aircraft touched down with less than 300 feet of runway remaining. When the canopy animation lifted, she unbuckled, exited, and walked toward the ready room. No one spoke, no one moved. The instructor clicked off the sim screen. Another watched her through the plexiglass partition. One of them finally said, She's not learning this here. They were right. Whatever had taught her to fly didn't come from a training wing. It came from places where comms failed, where systems didn't warn you before quitting, where stall horns didn't always sound and the wind didn't care about runway. Headings. She flew like someone who had learned in silence and survived by instinct. But the others didn't see that. Not yet. They just saw a cadet who never smiled, never joined the card games, and always walked like she'd already passed every test. At 17:30 sharp, the classroom doors were locked. No phones, no laptops, no notepads. The briefing officer made it clear this wasn't a regular lesson. The cadets shuffled into their seats with half-curious, half-nervous glances. The projector screen hummed to life at the front of the room, a grainy black and white image slowly sharpening into aerial thermal footage. The instructor didn't introduce the clip. He just said, Watch and listen. The footage showed a narrow canyon, high desert, possibly somewhere along the border. Heat signatures moved below. Vehicle outlines, infantry movement. A voice crackled through over comms. Partly scrambled, partly intelligible. Wind noise cut in and out. There were no names, no dates, just shapes and sounds. Meera sat near the back, her elbows resting on the table, hands laced loosely. Her face gave nothing away. The cadets in the front row leaned forward slightly, trying to catch the details in the audio. Then came the line. This is Raven 9. I'm in the corridor. LZ's hot. I repeat, hot. Requesting exfil now. It came fast, firm, unmistakable. The room didn't move. At first, no one reacted. The screen flickered as flares lit the terrain, figures scattering below, the voice repeating its call through bursts of static. In the third row, a cadet blinked, then looked back toward Meera. She hadn't moved, but her right hand had curled into a fist. Not tight, not theatrical, just pressure, the kind you apply without realizing. Her jaw was locked, lips drawn tight. Her shoulders didn't rise. She didn't breathe differently. But the entire row near her could feel it. The screen went black after 23 seconds of footage. The instructor didn't explain. He clicked off the projector, flipped the light switch, and told the group they were dismissed. No questions, no comments. One by one, cadets stood. A few whispered under their breath. One said, What was that even from another guest Afghanistan? Maybe Syria. Someone muttered, Psych test. Bet it's fake. Nobody looked at Meera directly. She stayed seated long after the others left, hands still on the table, knuckles white from pressure she wouldn't show anywhere else. The instructor walked past her without stopping, but he gave a short glance to the tech sergeant at the back of the room. A nod, not casual, something confirmed. Outside, wind stirred across the tarmac, kicking dust in low spirals between parked Humvees and maintenance carts. The sun was falling fast behind the barracks, but the heat lingered in the concrete. Meera walked back to her dorm without a word. Carter Reed tried to fall into step beside her. He said nothing. She didn't acknowledge him. After 3 strides, he fell back. Back in the hallway, lights buzzed low. Doors shut quietly. No one said anything as she passed, but they had all seen it now. The stillness when the voice played, the way she didn't blink during the gunfire, the name Raven 9, no one needed confirmation. They didn't know the mission, didn't know the outcome, but now they knew something they hadn't before. She wasn't just different. She was dangerous. By the end of the week, Meera Stratton's name stopped showing up on the standard simulator roster. Instead, she was quietly reassigned to a different training schedule. No announcement, no reason given. When other cadets asked, instructors changed the subject or shrugged like they hadn't noticed. The rumors came back fast, but they had changed in tone. She's not a cadet. She's some kind of observer. Embedded evaluator, maybe. Others guessed she had combat hours. A few joked nervously that she was part of an internal audit team. No one laughed loud. Instructors treated her differently now. Not warmer, just sharper. They watched her sim debriefs more closely, asked fewer questions, but stayed longer in the room. One instructor stood behind her during a full systems failure drill and didn't write a single note. He just stared at the screen, arms crossed, like watching a live feed instead of training software. When she passed him on the flight line later that day, he didn't nod or say a word. He just stepped aside. In the chow hall, tables that used to fall quiet when she entered now stayed silent for a different reason. The cadets glanced over, but not with mockery, with something closer to calculation. The kind of look you give someone when you're trying to measure how wrong you might have been. On Monday, the new rotation schedule went up. Meera's name was at the top of a column no one else recognized. Advanced Rotary Wing. Cadets scanned the page, looking for familiar codes. One finally asked, "Wait, are we doing UH-60 modules this early?" The instructor barely looked up. "That's not for this group." Carter Reed leaned over, reading the name again. Stratton, seriously, who signs off on that? Nobody answered. The Black Hawk sim building was separate from the standard T6 bays. Older, colder, and quieter. You needed clearance to access the modules. The rumors only spread faster after that. Some said she had former unit credentials still on file. Others claimed she was flagged for SOCOM before washing out of something. Classified. A few believed she had flown with a Night Stalker unit, but no one could confirm. What mattered more was that none of the instructors denied it. That Wednesday, Meera showed up to the UH-60 sim bay already in flight gear. Not issued gear, black suit, plain patch, no unit name, just a Velcro strip where a call sign might have gone. She didn't speak as she passed the cadets standing nearby. She didn't need to. The instructor at the console watched her strap in. The sim booted to a blackout insertion drill with dynamic threat overlays and variable GPS drift. She didn't blink. Her hands moved fast but never rushed. She dialed in altimeter corrections before the terrain even rendered, executed low-level passes through simulated valleys that would have grounded most student pilots. Halfway through the run, one of the instructors leaned into another. She's not learning these profiles. She's remembering them. After the session, no one spoke to her in the locker area. A few cadets moved aside when she walked through. Carter Reed muttered something under his breath, but didn't say it twice. Whatever he had to prove, he knew the moment had passed. She wasn't one of them. Not anymore. And maybe she never had been. The storm had rolled in faster than forecasted, dropping visibility to under 100 meters and coating every surface in layered. Ice by 14:30. Snow lashed the hangar windows in thick sheets. Radios crackled with clipped orders, most of them cancellations. Flight ops were officially grounded until 06:00 the next day. At 14:42, a transmission broke through the interference. Patrol Echo 3 had stalled on an ice shelf near Ridge 12. 3 Humvees trapped. 2 casualties. 1 fading fast from exposure. Wind shear over the pass made fixed wing impossible. Ground response was out of position. No rotor asset had clearance to launch. Command reviewed the coordinates, rejected the evac. Too narrow, too volatile, too late. Estimated window for extraction was listed as 0. At 14:47, Meera Stratton entered Hangar 3. She didn't run. She didn't argue. She just walked through the maintenance bay, bypassed the standby line, and stopped in front of Tail 381, a Blackhawk MH-60 DAP variant configured for multi-role ops. Its engines were cold, its exterior half-iced. The crew chief looked up from a checklist, confused. "Ma'am, you're not on the flight roster." She didn't answer. She ducked under the tail boom, ran a gloved hand across the access panel, then moved to the cockpit. Her boots left a thin trail of snow melt behind her. Inside, she powered the system stack manually, bypassed automated diagnostics, ran pre-flight on muscle memory alone. Avionics flickered. Backup GPS synced. The comms line hissed open as she keyed her mic. "Base command, this is Echo 1, departing vector south-southwest. Emergency response, logging now before contact loss, static." Then a pause. "Echo 1, we have no author." She cut the channel. The turbine whine started low, slow, like a breath waking up. The crew chief outside hesitated, one foot raised toward the ladder. "Ma'am, this isn't cleared. You don't have if you're not with me. Stay on the ground." He blinked, then climbed aboard. At 14:58, the red lights of the hangar began flashing. Emergency scramble protocol. Sirens barely cut through the wind as the hangar doors parted. The Blackhawk surged forward. The downwash ripped loose a tarp from a fuel pallet. Papers flew. A mechanic shouted. Inside the cockpit, Meera didn't flinch. She was already in the air. Outside, figures in parkas turned and watched. Some reached for radios, others just stared. The aircraft lifted clear, pitched south, and vanished into the wall of white. Her visor fogged slightly from the sudden temperature shift. She adjusted airflow with one hand while balancing pitch with the other. Wind rocked the fuselage hard at 300 feet. The terrain map blinked 3 times before stabilizing. She pushed forward anyway. By 15:06, she was in the corridor. A narrow break in the ridgeline barely wide enough for clearance. Snow came sideways now. Ice crept across the outer sensor arrays. Altimeter drifted. Autopilot disengaged. She didn't touch it. Her hands stayed on manual. The airspeed dropped. Visibility near 0. The warning tone chirped twice. She responded with a nose-down pitch correction. Cut left. And used a known thermal updraft from a previous training run to bank through. A tight reverse arc. At 15:09, a voice came through the second channel. Cold. Broken. Echo 1. This is Ridge 12 element. We see you. She exhaled, not relief. Just focus. Hang on, she said. I'm bringing it down. Meera dropped elevation fast, nose pitched 5 degrees down, skids nearly kissing the snow line. Her eyes flicked between the terrain profile and forward visual. Nothing on the map was accurate now. The storm had erased every contour. Only instinct and memory kept her off the ridgelines. At 15:13, she switched to terrain-following mode manual. No radar assist. The Blackhawk hugged the valley like a shadow. Snow curled off the rotor tips in tight spirals, visibility collapsing to less than 40 meters. She banked left, then hard right, adjusting pitch and collective like a second language. Crew Chief Martin held onto the ceiling handle, eyes locked on the altimeter. This shouldn't be working. But it was. The downed convoy appeared as 3 heat blurs through the windshield. 2 Humvees burned slow. One was flipped on its side. Snow piled high around it. Movement behind the wrecks. Meera kicked in the side rudder and brought the Blackhawk into a shallow hover, drifting sideways to block the exposed wounded from line of sight up the ridge. At 15:17, her skids touched ground. Snow whipped outward in a white cyclone. She keyed the rear mic. Go. The crew deployed fast. 2 techs dropped with stretcher rigs. Martin called out vitals over the internal channel. 1 with a compound fracture, 1 unconscious, 1 walking but bleeding out. Gunfire echoed off the cliff's short bursts. Close. Not organized but deliberate. Up top, Martin shouted. Meera didn't hesitate. She used the aircraft itself as a shield. Pivoted on the rear rotor, aligning the body between the shooters and her crew. She activated countermeasures but held fire. The gunner, pinned to the door, didn't move. We can't light them up, Martin said. Not without optics. She adjusted pitch to lift slightly, just enough to change the angle of cover. The rounds hit the tail boom but glanced off harmlessly. Inside the cabin, one of the younger medics stared at her, his voice barely audible under his helmet. She's not supposed to be flying. She's the data tech. Right, another answered. Low. That's her. That's the one from Kunar. What, shut up. It was too late. The words hung in the air. Meera tuned it out, focused on stabilizing the hover despite wind shear and rotor drag. Altimeter dipped again. She compensated instantly. By 15:23, the last casualty was loaded. 1 crew tech banged the side rail twice. We're up. She pulled collective, rotated away from the incoming fire. The Blackhawk leapt from the snow, rotors clawing the air. Below, small arms fire traced a line they were already past. She didn't speak, just flew, back through the canyon, same route, tighter angles. Wind had shifted, head-on gusts now. The torque gauge redlined once. She rolled throttle back, held at max performance climb, pushing the airframe harder than protocol allowed. Behind her, the crew worked in controlled chaos. Someone clamped a femoral bleed. Someone else cleared a blocked airway. The med chief called out vitals like a prayer. She kept flying. By 1537, the lights of the outer base perimeter blinked through the fog. Command tower lit up her frequency. Echo 1. Confirm package. She clicked twice. No words. The tower didn't ask again. She brought the Black Hawk in low, flared hard just before touchdown, skids crunching on the snow-packed tarmac. As the rotors slowed, ground crew sprinted forward. The medics unloaded the wounded. Meera stayed in the cockpit, hands still on the controls, breathing steady. Not a scratch on her. Not this time. The storm receded by morning, leaving behind a thin crust of ice over everything the sun hadn't touched. Hangar doors groaned open under the weight of wind-hardened snow. Flight crews moved slower than usual. Conversations dropped to murmurs when Meera passed. She didn't expect recognition. She hadn't waited for permission to fly, and she knew that came with consequences. But no reprimand ever came. No inquiry, no tribunal. Just silence. At 0610, she returned the headset and clipboard she'd taken before the rescue. No one questioned her for bypassing the sign-out sheet. The tech sergeant who accepted them looked at her for a long second, then nodded once. She nodded back. That afternoon, she found a folded note under her door. Plain maintenance paper, the handwriting rough, scrawled in blue ink. Just 2 lines. They said quota. We were wrong. Below it, 7 cadet numbers, no names. She read it once, then tucked it into her flight manual. Her name no longer appeared on the sim rotation board. Instead, she began receiving printed briefings with coded instructions. No one said who assigned them. She followed each order as written, executed each run, never asked question, never volunteered detail. At 20 under the next evening, she opened her locker and found a new flight patch pinned to her undershirt. Not standard issue. A black crescent moon with a hawk diving through it, wings tucked, talons forward. Above it, in silver thread, the call sign Ghost Flight. She didn't ask who left it. She just sewed it onto her flight suit. The instructor stopped calling her cadet after that. Some used Stratton. Others, ma'am. A few simply nodded. During one mission prep session, the operations chief handed her a terrain schematic and said, "Want to double-check this profile like she had always been part of the planning cell." She did. Word moved through the base the way wind moved through hangar gaps, quiet but unstoppable. Someone had flown into the storm when everyone else stood down. Someone had brought back 6 soldiers. 3 of them alive only because someone ignored protocol. They didn't say her name. They didn't have to. At the firing range, younger cadets started pausing when she arrived. They didn't stare. They didn't ask questions. They just cleared the lane next to her and watched from the corners of their eyes as she ran controlled drills with the M9, smooth reloads. No wasted movement, no comment. In the mess, tables that once excluded her now made space without speaking. A tray left, a seat shifted, a nod given. It wasn't welcome. It was respect. The kind not offered, only earned. One morning, she stepped onto the apron at 0552 to find 12 cadets in formation. No officer had ordered them there. They weren't in dress uniform. Just flight suits, no salute, no speech, just stillness as she passed. She kept walking. By 0800, her locker had been reassigned to the instructor wing. The nameplate didn't say lieutenant. It said pilot. The Black Hawk she'd flown during the Stormtail 381 was rolled into secondary maintenance for inspection. The crew chief reported no faults, no stress fractures, not even rotor fatigue. He wrote in the log, "Bird flew clean," then signed his name without rank. That evening, she walked past the simulator building and heard her name whispered in a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. Not just Stratton, not just Meera. The full call sign, Ghost Flight. The voices stopped when she entered. No one met her eyes, but one of them stepped back to let her through the doorway without being asked. Her new gear arrived in an unmarked canvas bag. Inside, 2 items: a reinforced flight harness rated for night operations, and a soft patch with updated identifiers SOC guest clearance. She placed the patch in her breast pocket and wore the harness the next day, without comment. Captain Herrera passed her in the corridor 3 days later. He didn't stop, but he slowed, eyes scanning the Ghost Flight patch on her shoulder. He gave a short nod. That was all. No handshake, no ceremony. just the silent currency of experience. By the end of the week, the brass had stopped referring to her sortie as a breach. They called it field response, quietly moved the event log into the live mission register, even assigned a retroactive case ID to the evac. It didn't go on any public wall. No commendation was issued. But the crew of Ridge 12 knew, and that was enough. One of the rescued soldiers, barely old enough to shave, left something on her. Bunk the following Sunday, a cheap embroidered patch, off-center, stitched by hand. A stick-figure Black Hawk with crooked blades, and under it saved by the diversity pick. She stared at it for a long moment, then pinned it just below the official patch. She didn't smile. Not fully. Just a breath deeper than usual. A pressure released in the chest. At 21 Nero that night, she stepped onto the empty apron. Snow dusted the tarmac. Lights glowed faint through the mist. The only sound came from the distant turbine hum of maintenance checks in. Hangar 2. She walked the edge of the flight line slowly, hands in her pockets, boots leaving clean tracks behind. At the end of the line, she paused, turned toward the row of birds under canvas covers, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she allowed herself to stop walking. Not because she was lost, but because she was no longer just moving forward. Now, she belonged. It was late when the knock came. Meera had just finished filing a maintenance log for the Black Hawk when she heard it 3 short raps on the ready room door. She opened it to find a civilian sedan idling on the tarmac. No plates. Just tinted windows and a single driver in flight-approved cold gear. He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside, one line in courier-type report to H-35 2200 hours. Field uniform. H-35 was the dome at the edge of the base, older than most hangars, used for night vision calibration and testing. She hadn't stepped inside it since her arrival. She walked alone under a moon so sharp it turned the snow into shards. The silence between her boots and the wind felt heavier than usual. Inside, the dome lights glowed dim amber. Colonel Hayes stood near a console. Next to him, leaning against a support beam, was Jesse Alden. He hadn't changed much. Still lean. Same mustache tucked under a grinning lip. Prairie dog, they used to call him. He gave her a nod, then bumped his fist gently against hers. "Didn't expect to see you in flight boots again," he said. She didn't answer. Hayes stepped forward, holding a folded patch between 2 fingers. Black Hawk over a silver crescent. The moon was inverted. "Tips pointing up like open hands. Instructor variant," he said. "Means you carry others." He set it down. "We've lost too many in 18 months. Rotation burnout, family pulls, one we buried with full honors in a canyon with no name. We need someone who can teach more than airspace protocol. Someone who's already flown the dark." She looked at the patch, then at him. "I won't do the lecture circuit," she said. "No PowerPoints, no war stories. You won't have to," he replied. She stared at the patch again. The thread shimmered under the dome light. "I'll teach," she said. "But on my terms," Hayes nodded. Expected nothing else. 1 week later, Hangar 2 was cleared. 12 cadets stood in loose formation around a stripped MH-60 with exposed. Panels marked in chalk, no name roster, no intro brief. Just Meera in a flight suit, hands behind her back. "You know the strobe code for a covert engine fire?" she asked the nearest. "Cadet?" "Yes, ma'am." "Flash, pulse, flash." "Wrong theater. They changed it after fuel gel issues in Syria. Learn the new code or watch your crew die in confusion." She moved to the next. "Where do you stand when the tail rotor's downwash kicks snow off a ridgeline?" The cadet hesitated. "You don't stand," she said. "You crawl, belly to the ice, breathe the snow, pray the mountain lets you pass." By the end of the hour, 3 cadets looked pale. One quietly stepped off to vomit behind a portable heater. She handed out no praise, no ridicule, just hard surgical facts. What works? What kills? What saves someone else's son when the radios fail and the weather lies? Over the next few days, word spread. She trained like a ghost. Showed up unannounced. Asked questions no manual covered. Corrected grip angles on emergency levers. Showed how to read terrain from shadows alone. The cadets who resisted cracked fast. Those who listened began to change. Their posture, their questions, their silences. One tried to challenge her during an emergency auto-rotation drill. He lost altitude too fast. Slammed the sim hard enough to trigger the fault reset. She didn't scold him. She just asked, "You ever see someone burn because you guessed wrong?" He didn't answer. She let that hang. Mess hall chatter changed. Now it was her tactics they repeated. Her field corrections. Her terrain readouts. Maintenance crews began leaving fresh chalk next to her hangar section. Someone left a heat pack folded into her locker flap. The old instructor list posted outside operations was quietly edited. Beneath the names, someone added a new stencil line: CW4 Stratton A, Special Operations Guest Instructor. 2 nights later, someone taped over the word guest. By morning, it just read instructor. Meera didn't mention it. She just showed up early, checked flight lines, and waited for the cadets to come find her. Most did. Some, only once. The smart ones returned with notebooks full of real questions. By the end of the first month, every cadet in the unit could identify a landing zone in less than 10 seconds. On an inverted terrain feed, none of them learned that from a book. They learned it from the one who flew when everyone else stood down, and the sky never forgot. When the promotion letter came through official channels, it didn't surprise her. It had been building for weeks. Commendations, unofficial endorsements, names dropped in classified briefings. The form arrived folded inside her logbook, just below her final eval sheet from the last training rotation, CW4 to CW5. It came with back pay, a command billet, and a seat at the policy table. She signed her name at the bottom, declined. The admin tech blinked twice when she returned it. Thought maybe it was a mistake. You sure? She nodded once. Rank never kept a bird in the air. The phrase stuck. By the following morning, the quote had been scribbled in Sharpie on the chalkboard outside the operations bay. Someone framed it. No one erased it. She still flew every third night, still ran drills without announcement, still called cadets out for checklist errors that could kill crews in a hot zone. But something had changed. Not her pace, not her voice, not even the way she folded her gloves before stowing them. It was how people stood when she entered a room. At first it was just the cadets. They stopped mid-sentence when she stepped into the sim bay, cleared paths for her in the locker aisles, started arriving early, hoping she'd show up unprompted and offer a story she'd never tell. Then the instructors followed, not with salutes, just a pause, a shift in posture, a subtle nod. It wasn't about authority, it was reverence. One afternoon, during a multi-unit mission brief, a younger trainee leaned sideways toward his instructor, eyes wide and a whisper barely audible. "Doesn't she ever get tired?" The instructor didn't look up from his notes. "Night doesn't tire," he said. "It just changes pilots." No one laughed. The room was too quiet for that. Later that week, a medevac crew invited her to their table. She didn't sit, just rested a hand on the back of the chair and left a folded field note. On it, "Adjust your dust landing angle. You're blinding your own medics." They adjusted. She never mentioned it again. Her call sign, Ghost Flight, was now etched into the sim rotation database, not as a name, but as a category. Training Tier X. Access granted by referral only. Cadets whispered like it was folklore. But those who trained under her knew better. She didn't speak to impress. She spoke to prevent funerals. That was the real difference. Some chase rank to climb. She flew low so others could survive. And every time a Black Hawk passed overhead in the night, there were those who looked up and wondered who sat at the controls. They knew. Even if they never saw her face. The snow came lightly that morning, same as a year before. Not the blinding storm that had grounded fleets, but a quiet drift, soft against the windows. By 0600, the base had returned to its rhythm boots on tarmac. Radios crackling, metal doors sighing open. Meera finished her run around the airfield, boots tracking fresh prints along the perimeter line. She didn't run for pace, just habit, focus, memory. Outside the gym, 5 figures stood waiting. No salute, no uniform formation, just presence. One leaned on a cane. Another held a thermos close against the cold. Their jackets bore no unit patches. But Meera recognized the faces even before they spoke. They had been inside the snow, trapped near Ridge 12, the ones she pulled from fire and white silence. They never forgot. The youngest of them stepped forward, offered something folded in one hand. "We had this made." Took some convincing. He opened his palm. It was a flight patch, rough-stitched, black border, a silhouette of a Black Hawk flying through a storm cloud. Below it, the words curved in white thread, "Saved by the diversity pick." Meera looked at it for a long moment, then smiled. Not a grin, just the kind that shows in the corners of the eyes. She said nothing, but took the patch and nodded once. Later that night, she sewed it next to the original Ghost Flight above, "Saved by the diversity pick" below, both stitched near her heart. The others noticed. Cadets began tapping their chests once before climbing into cockpits. Some carried small tokens in their flight suits photos, folded notes. Old patches faded with time. No one said where the tradition started. No one needed to. Meera never gave speeches, never talked about the storm. She never listed the names of the men she saved, or the risks she took, or the rules she broke that night. She just showed up, checked flight logs, watched cadets like a hawk behind dark lenses, and when she stepped onto the flight line, people moved without needing to be told. Her legend wasn't built in stories. It was in the way instructors paused when she walked past, in how the chatter stopped when she entered the sim bay, in how even seasoned pilots adjusted their language in her presence, not out of fear, but respect. She never spoke of rank, only of margin, only of time saved, lives held together by seconds, choices made in wind and fire. On the wall near her quarters hung one photo, not framed, just tacked in place. A grainy capture of a Black Hawk barely visible through blizzard fog. No names, no caption, just flight in the impossible. That was her legacy. Not shouted, not recorded, just carried in quiet hands, passed from pilot to pilot, like a torch that didn't burn but lit the sky.